At 0847 hours local time, a United States Air Force RC-135 Rivet Joint reconnaissance aircraft crossed into international airspace over the South China Sea, 127 nautical miles southeast of Hainan Island. The four-engine converted Boeing 707 carried a crew of 31 pilots, navigators, signals intelligence officers, and electronic warfare specialists. Their mission was routine: collect signals, map Chinese radar coverage, monitor communications traffic, document baseline electromagnetic patterns. The kind of operation American air intelligence had conducted for 7 decades without asking Beijing's permission. The RC-135 climbed to flight level 280, approximately 28,000 feet, well above commercial traffic, well within international airspace, traveling at 420 knots on a southwesterly heading. Mission planners in Guam had calculated optimal routes accounting for known Chinese air defense positions, sensor coverage areas, and historical patterns of fighter intercepts. The Rivet Joint would spend 90 minutes collecting data, then turn for Katanina Air Base in Okinawa. Standard profile: the kind of flight that had generated thousands of hours of patrol data without significant incident. But at Lingshui Air Base on Hainan, 70 kilometers from the RC-135's flight path, the situation was different today. A Shenyang J-11D fighter had scrambled at 0823 hours, 11 minutes before the Rivet Joint entered the patrol area. The J-11D was one of China's modern fourth-generation fighters, a derivative of the Russians' 27 with Chinese avionics, engines, and weapons integration. Maximum speed Mach 3.5. Service ceiling 56,000 feet. Combat radius extending over 2,000 kilometers with external fuel tanks. On paper, it was a capable machine. What mattered today was that it was fast, it was armed, and its pilot had received specific orders from his squadron commander. Intercept the American reconnaissance aircraft, close to visual identification range, demonstrate Chinese sovereignty over the airspace, show Beijing's willingness to challenge American operations. The orders didn't explicitly state what rules of engagement applied if the American aircraft failed to comply with warnings to leave. Orders never did. Plausible deniability existed in the space between explicit commands and implied expectations. At 0844 hours, the J-11D pilot established radar contact with the RC-135 at a distance 27 kilometers. His ground control intercept operator at Lingshui confirmed the target: American reconnaissance aircraft, transponder transmitting civilian squawk code VUN 200, heading 240 degrees, altitude 28,000 feet, speed 420 knots. The Chinese pilot began acceleration, climbing to intercept altitude while maintaining course to position himself ahead of the American flight path. The math was straightforward: RC-135 speed 420 knots, J-11D speed 1,100 knots at cruise climb, close rate approximated at 680 knots, time to intercept position approximately 12 minutes. Aboard the RC-135, the crew was focused on their collection mission. The aircraft's signals intelligence operators occupied a cramped compartment lined with racks of receivers, signal processors, and recording equipment. They monitored the full spectrum from very low-frequency communications up through microwave radar signals. Chinese air defense radar transmissions, a familiar picture. Lingshui site transmitting constant volume search radar on standard frequency. Qionghai site to the southwest tracking aircraft. Sanya site to the south maintaining periodic radar pulses. None of it was new. All of it was documented. All of it was expected. The pilots in the forward cockpit maintained straight and level flight, discussing weather patterns and fuel consumption with the calm professionalism of crews who had flown this route dozens of times. The flight engineer monitored engine parameters. 4 turbojets burning 6,000 pounds of fuel per hour. Steady consumption. No anomalies. At 0847 hours, the RC-135's radar warning receiver detected the J-11D's fire control radar locking onto them for the first time. The signal appeared on the crew's displays as a distinctive spike in the threat library. Chinese J-11D radar, identified as Type 74, frequency modulated search, not track assisted. Chinese fighters routinely intercepted American reconnaissance aircraft. It was theater, posturing. The fighters would close to visual range, take pictures, make radio calls warning the American aircraft to leave Chinese airspace, then break off. Professional adversaries following an unwritten script. The RC-135 crew acknowledged the radar lock on their internal net. Mission commander in the back made a note in the flight log. Another day, another intercept, standard profile. What made this day different was the pilot of the J-11D. His name was Lieutenant Commander Wang Chen, 34 years old, 17 years in the People's Liberation Army Air Force. He had completed 73 combat training sorties and flown 42 operational intercepts against American aircraft. He was also frustrated by orders that constrained his fighters' capabilities, frustrated by rules of engagement that treated interception as a diplomatic exercise rather than an air combat scenario, frustrated by American aircraft operating operating so close to Chinese territory, so confident in their technological superiority, so contemptuous of Chinese airspace sovereignty. And on this particular morning, Wang Chen had received a briefing that changed his perspective. The briefing came from his squadron commander, Major Liu Xing, a 48-year-old career officer with political connections reaching into the Central Military Commission itself. The briefing was classified at the highest levels. The Americans, Major Liu explained, had escalated their surveillance operations, new sensors, more frequent patrols, deeper penetration into Chinese air defense coverage. The situation had been discussed at levels above the Air Force. Strategic decisions had been made. The message from above was clear, though never stated explicitly. The Americans needed to understand that provocations had consequences, not military consequences necessarily, political consequences, operational consequences, enough disruption that American commanders would question whether these missions were worth the risk. The briefing contained video of the RC-135, footage showing the aircraft's dimensions, sensor packages, crew positions, video showing what happened when American electronic warfare systems failed or overstressed, video showing what happened when fighters closed to short range at high speed with specific tactical objectives in mind. The message was implicit but unmistakable. If an opportunity presented itself to demonstrate consequences, that demonstration would be valued. Career advancement would follow. At 0851 an hours, the J-11D reached intercept position, pulling in front of the RC-135 at a distance of 15 kilometers, 2 miles in front of the American aircraft's nose. Wang Chen established a descending turn, positioning himself in an aggressive posture relative to the American flight path. The J-11D descended through 28,000 feet to 27,500 feet, putting the fighter 500 feet below the RC-135 in the aircraft's blind spot relative to forward visibility. This was deliberate. This was not the standard intercept geometry used for friendly photo passes. This was positioning for tactical advantage. The RC-135 radar warning receiver detected the maneuver. The J-11D's radar shifted modes. No longer search radar, acquisition radar, the type used when prepared to employ weapons. The crew's threat warning system sounded, not a routine alert, a priority alert, weapons radar tracking notification. The RC-135's electronic warfare officer, Captain James Morrison, a 31-year-old from Des Moines with 11 years in Air Force intelligence, immediately transmitted on the International Guard frequency. Unknown fighter, this is American reconnaissance aircraft on international airways. Request your engines. Standard protocol. Professional courtesy. Identification and clarification of purpose. The response came in accented English, female voice, unmistakably Chinese air traffic control. American aircraft, you are in Chinese airspace conducting illegal surveillance. You must depart immediately or face consequences. The RC-135's mission commander, Major Richard Sutton, a 52-year-old career signals intelligence officer, transmitted a response. We are conducting operations in international airspace in accordance with international law. Our position is 127 nautical miles from Hainan Island, outside territorial waters, outside the 12 nautical mile territorial sea. The response was immediate and definitive. Your position is in the Eastern Defense Identification Zone. You must leave or military action will be taken. The RC-135's pilot, Colonel Thomas Hartley, a 56-year-old with 28 years in the Air Force, maintained course and altitude. The aircraft was operating legally. The position was unambiguous. The airspace was international. The mission would continue. But Colonel Hartley increased the frequency of radio checks with Kadena Air Base and initiated procedures to accelerate the timeline for turnaround and departure from the area. At 0854 hours, the J-11D pilot made his move. Wang Chen rolled into a steep bank to his left, positioning the fighter directly above the RC-135's wing. This maneuver placed him approximately 200 feet above the American aircraft, 30 meters lateral separation, directly in the RC-135's overhead. The fighter closed the lateral distance to 100 feet. The J-11D was so close that the RC-135 crew could see the fighter's landing gear clearly, so close that the aircraft's wingtip vortices, the powerful rotating air columns generated by the fighter's wing, began to interact with the RC-135's flight path. These vortices were invisible but devastating. A large aircraft passing through a fighter's wake could experience sudden, violent rolls and pitch changes. At 100 feet separation, moving at combined speeds approximating 900 knots, a loss of control was entirely possible. RC-135's flight engineer felt it first, an unusual vibration through the control yoke, a sensation of the wing dropping slightly. The autopilot compensated automatically, but the disturbance was noticeable. The pilot felt it next, a subtle but distinct roughness in the aircraft's motion, the characteristic buffeting of wing vortex interaction. Colonel Hartley's hands moved to the control yoke, ready to take manual control if the situation deteriorated. The J-11D maintained position, hovering approximately 100 feet away, close enough to see individual crew members in the RC-35's windows, close enough that any sudden maneuver by either aircraft would result in collision. This was no longer an intercept. This was a demonstration of territorial intent through the physics of proximity and closure rate. The RC-135's electronic warfare officer, Captain Morrison, observed the weapon's radar tracking indicator on his display. Still active, still locked. The J-11D's targeting systems were maintaining continuous radar lock on the American aircraft. The threat warning system remained activated, steady pulse indicating continuous radar guidance. Morrison transmitted a priority call to Kadena Air Base. Kadena, this is Rivet Joint 7-7. We have a single fighter, assessed J-11D, in close formation off our right wing, approximately 100 feet separation, maintaining position. Weapons radar active and locked. Request immediate fighter support and guidance. The response from Kadena came within seconds. Kadena Air Base, located in Okinawa, was the primary forward Air Force installation for the 7th Air Force. Two F-15E Strike Eagles were airborne on a routine combat air patrol, approximately 140 nautical miles south of the RC-135's position. The F-15E was a two-seat, twin-engine fighter designed for air-to-air combat and ground attack. Maximum speed Mach 2.5. Combat radius extending over 500 nautical miles. Armament including air-to-air missiles for BVR, beyond visual range, and close-in dogfighting. The two Strike Eagles pilot and weapons officer heard the call simultaneously. Flight lead was Captain Marcus Rodriguez, 34 years old, 200 combat hours, 45 air-to-air kills attributed to his training and combat tactics. His wingman was Captain David Chen, 31 years old, 950 combat hours, 28 attributed kills. Both were combat-proven fighter pilots with experience against advanced threat systems. The decision to intercept was made in milliseconds. Both Strike Eagles initiated simultaneous bank toward the RC-1C-135's position. Afterburners engaged, both aircraft accelerated from cruise speed of 40 knots to supersonic velocity exceeding 1.0 Mach. Profile put both fighters on an intercept course with the developing incident. Distance to intercept 140 nautical miles. Time to arrival approximately 11 minutes. Aboard the RC-135, the situation was deteriorating. The J-11D maintained the same aggressive geometry, hovering 100 feet off the right wing. The fighter's nose was pointed slightly down at the RC-35's fuselage. Wingtip vortices generated visible turbulence on the American aircraft surfaces. Captain Morrison watched the weapon's radar indicator continue to generate tracking updates. The system was not passive surveillance, it was active targeting. The distinction was critical. A radar lock without weapons deployment was provocative posturing. A weapons radar lock indicated the possibility of imminent weapon employment. The RC-135 was a defenseless aircraft. No chaff dispensers, no flare systems, no electronic measures beyond passive warning receivers. The aircraft was designed to collect signals, not survive hostile action. Against a determined attack, the RC-135 would have no defense other than maneuvers that might disrupt missile guidance momentarily. Colonel Hartley made a decision. He initiated a descending turn to the left, a maneuver designed to increase separation from the J-11D and move away from the fighter's position geometry. The J-11D pilot followed immediately. Wang Chen matched the American aircraft's descent and turn, maintaining the same 100-foot separation. The Chinese pilot was executing what fighter pilots called a scissors maneuver, a cutting sequence designed to establish offensive position for weapon employment. The RC-135 was not a fighter. It could not outmaneuver a J-11D. The best Colonel Hartley could achieve was to maintain forward motion and generate distance. He increased descent rate to 500 feet per minute, losing altitude rapidly. The J-11D descended with him, still maintaining position, still maintaining weapons radar lock. At 0858 hours, the two F-15E Strike Eagles reached supersonic speed and began accelerating past Mach 1.2. The lead F-15E pilot transmitted on the emergency frequency that the RC-135 was monitoring. Rivet Joint 7-7, this is Red Eagle 1-1. We are inbound your position, currently 110 nautical miles south. Estimating intercept position in 10 minutes. Maintain current vector and advise any status changes. The response from Colonel Hartley was immediate. Red Eagle 1-1, Rivet Joint 7-7. Acknowledged. Single fighter maintaining hostile geometry, weapons radar active, actively maneuvering to maintain intercept course. Separation currently 100 feet, descending at 500 feet per minute. Altitude currently 24,000 feet and descending. Fighter profile assessed as J-11D. Advise how you want us to proceed. Captain Rodriguez's response was calm and measured, the product of years of training in high-stress scenarios. Rivet Joint. Maintain current descent and maneuvers. Do not attempt to outturn the fighter. Increase speed if possible. Head toward open water. Maximize separation distance. We are inbound your position at best speed. Brake. The two F-15E Strike Eagles were now accelerating past Mach 1.3, consuming fuel at a prodigious rate but closing the distance distance rapidly. Captain Chen, the wingman, configured his aircraft for maximum speed while maintaining formation with his lead. Both fighters were climbing to altitude for intercept geometry, zipping 20 degrees, aimed at a collision course with the J-11D and RC-135 formation. The J-11D pilot, Wang Chen, was fully aware of the American fighters inbound. His ground control intercept operators at Lingshui had detected the F-15 formation, radioed warnings, and provided heading and altitude updates. The situation was approaching a decision point: continue the aggressive intercept and risk direct confrontation with American fighters equipped with air-to-air missiles, or break off contact and maintain the fiction of routine interception. Wang Chen made his decision. He had orders from his squadron commander. He had direction from higher political levels. He had demonstrated Chinese sovereignty by closing to 100 feet of an American aircraft in a hostile geometry, weapons radar active. The message had been sent. Continuing the intercept with American fighters 12 minutes away would be operationally inadvisable and diplomatically counterproductive. At 9:09:001 hours, initiated a hard brake to the right, executing a 7G turn that threw the fighter away from the RC-35's formation. The Chinese aircraft climbed back to altitude, accelerated to supersonic speed, and began heading toward the southwest, away from the incoming American fighters. The RC-135 crew felt the sudden absence of the fighters' presence. The weapons radar lock indicators on their displays flickered and disappeared. The threat warning system, which had been generating steady pulse tones for over 7 minutes, fell silent. Captain Morrison immediately transmitted the update. Red Eagle 11, Rivet Joint 77. Fighter has broken off and is departing to the southwest. Radar lock terminated. No weapons employment. Situation assessed as resolved, but the situation was far from resolved. The two F-15E Strike Eagles were now only 80 nautical miles away, still accelerating, still climbing, still on intercept course with the departing J-11D. Captain Rodriguez made a critical decision. The J-11D pilot had demonstrated hostile intent by maintaining weapons radar lock and aggressive geometry with a defenseless aircraft. The fighter had broken off only because it detected the American fighters inbound. The sequence constituted a serious violation of aviation safety protocol and represented a deliberate attempt to intimidate or threaten an American military aircraft. The incident would need to be documented. The fighter would need to be intercepted. A message would need to be sent back to Beijing that actions had consequences. Rodriguez transmitted to his wingmen. Red Eagle 2, this is 1. I want you to make visual contact with the J-11D, document the tail number and any identification markings, maintain safe separation, and photograph the aircraft for intelligence analysis. I will maintain top cover position and monitor for any additional threats. Rules of engagement permit defensive measures if the hostile aircraft attempts any aggressive maneuver toward us. The wingmen acknowledged. Red Eagle 2 copies. Will execute visual ID pass and photograph. Standing by for additional fighter support if required. At 09:05 hours, the two F-15E Eagles reached 35,000 feet altitude and Mach 1.8 speed. The J-11D was ahead of them, still accelerating toward the southwest, descending toward lower altitude, where the fighter's maneuverability advantage would be greater. The pursuit geometry was degrading for the American fighters. At Mach 1.8, fuel consumption was extreme. The F-15Es would have limited time before they needed to break off and return to base. Captain Rodriguez calculated the intercept parameters. The J-11D was moving away at approximately 900 knots. The F-15Es were moving at approximately 1,200 knots. Closure rate 300 knots. Distance remaining 80 nautical miles. Time to intercept approximately 16 minutes. Fuel state would allow approximately 4 minutes of high-speed pursuit before bingo fuel, the minimum needed to return safe to Dina. The geometry was not ideal for a close interception, but it was achievable. Rodriguez pressed the pursuit. At 09:08 hours, the wingman, Captain Chen, established visual contact with the J-11D. The Chinese fighter was now at 20,000 feet, descending toward lower altitude, heading 210 degrees toward the Chinese coastline. Chen transmitted his visual. Red Eagle 1, 2 has tallied J-11D at 20,000 feet, heading 210, approximately 40 nautical miles, descending and heading toward coast. I'm moving to port side for identification pass. Ken maneuvered his F-15E to position himself on the J-11D's wing, approximately 500 feet lateral separation, matching course and altitude. The relative geometry made high-speed closure impossible without collision risk. Chen held position and began photographing the Chinese fighter with the F-15's gun camera and an external high-resolution imaging pod mounted on the aircraft's centerline. The photographs would show the aircraft's tail number, maintenance condition, weapons configuration, and any other details that could be used for damage assessment. The J-11D pilot, Wang Chen, saw the American fighter position himself on his wing. The weapons systems officer who had been coaching the pilot watched the F-15 maneuver into position. There was a moment of shock, then calculation. The American fighter had caught up. The American American fighters had intercepted. The tactical situation had reversed. The J-11D was no longer the aggressor. It was the target. Wang Chen initiated a hard left turn, trying to increase separation and descend toward lower altitude where the J-11D's turn rate and climb rate would provide advantage. The maneuver was defensive. The initiative was no longer with the Chinese pilot. The F-15E pilot, Captain Chen, did not follow the J-11D's aggressive turn. Instead, he maintained straight and level flight, documentation pass complete, and transmitted his findings to his lead. Red Eagle 1 has photos. J-11D tail number reads 2746, appears to be standard configuration, no damage or weapons employment. Braking right and returning to intercept point. Rodriguez, who was now 15 nautical miles behind the J-11D and closing, transmitted his intentions. Red Eagle 2, good work. I'm maintaining pursuit to complete identification. Stand by. Rodriguez accelerated further, pushing the F-15 past 1.9 Mach, bleeding fuel at an unsustainable rate, but closing the distance to the J-11D. The J-11D pilot realized what was happening. The American fighters had completed their identification pass. They were not attempting to establish sustained intercept geometry. They were not positioning for missile employment. They were documenting the incident. The message was becoming clear. Beijing's action in sending the J-11D to intercept the RC-135 with hostile geometry and weapons it had been recorded by American fighters who had now identified his aircraft by tail number. That identification would be transmitted through military intelligence channels. That intelligence would reach strategic decision makers. Consequences would follow. Wang Chen realized he had been manipulated. His squadron commander's briefing about strategic decisions and demonstrating serious consequences had positioned him as the instrument of Beijing's policy. Beijing had not considered the response. Beijing had not calculated that American fighters would intercept his fighter, identify him, and photograph him. Beijing had not planned for the intelligence dissemination that would follow. Wang Chen had become famous without being celebrated. His tail number was now associated with an aggressive intercept of an American reconnaissance aircraft. His aircraft was documented. His actions were recorded. The incident would be analyzed by American intelligence, NATO intelligence, Allied intelligence services. His call sign would become associated with escalation and recklessness. At 0910 hours, Captain Rodriguez reached a point 12 nautical miles behind the J-11D and decided to terminate the pursuit. Fuel state was approaching critical levels. Continuing to Mach 1.9 would leave him insufficient reserves for the return to Kadena and emergency landing recovery. The F-15E pilot transmitted his final status. Red Eagle 2, this is 1. Terminating pursuit at this time. Fuel state dictates return to base. Good work on the identification pass. Let's head home. The two F-15Es banked hard to the right, broke off their southwesterly pursuit vector, and reversed course toward Okinawa. The J-11D pilot, Wang Chen, continued toward the Chinese coastline. Altitude now 15,000 feet. Speed sonic at 550 knots, heading 210 degrees. He transmitted a request to Lingshui Air Base for clearance to land. The ground controller responded with vectors and cleared him for approach. The J-11D descended through 10,000 feet, then 5,000 feet, and began the final approach for landing. The flight was over. The incident was concluded, but the consequences were just beginning. The RC-135 crew, having confirmed that the J-11D had departed the area and American fighters were providing cover, transmitted a status update to Kadena Air Base. Kadena, Rivet Joint 77, all threats have departed the area. American fighters have intercepted and identified the hostile aircraft and documented the intercept. We are maintaining course and altitude pending further instructions. Request permission to resume collection mission. The response from Kadena was immediate. Rivet Joint 77, Kadena, authenticated clearance to resuming collection mission. Continue current course. Two F-15E Strike Eagles will maintain combat air patrol position at your 6 o'clock until you reach designated safe zone. Welcome home. The RC-135 level off at 26,000 feet, resumed its southwesterly heading, and continued its signals intelligence collection mission. But the crew's focus had shifted. The mission was secondary. The incident analysis was primary. Every pilot, every navigator, every signals officer knew that the interaction had been documented from multiple perspectives. The RC-135's intelligence systems had recorded the Chinese radar transmissions, the radio communications, every technical parameter of the intercept. The F-15E gun cameras had recorded the visual geometry and the J-11D's identification markings. The electronic warfare systems had documented the weapon's radar lock profile and threat escalation sequence. Within hours, this information would be compiled into a detailed intelligence report. Within days, it would reach the desk of the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Director of National Intelligence. Within weeks, it would be presented to the National Security Council for discussion of policy response options. Within months, it would become part of the classified record that would influence strategy decisions regarding China, regarding Taiwan, regarding the South China Sea. But for now, 90 nautical miles to the southwest, the J-11D fighter was landing at Lingshui Air Base. Ground personnel were ready with chains to secure the aircraft. Maintenance crews were standing by. The pilot, Wang Chen, was preparing for a debrief with his squadron commander, Major Liu Xing. That debrief would be difficult. Wang Chen had followed his orders. He had intercepted the American aircraft. He had maintained hostile geometry. He had activated weapons radar. He had demonstrated territorial intent through the physics of proximity and aggressive positioning. He had also failed to achieve any lasting result. The American aircraft had continued its mission. American fighters had intercepted his fighter. His aircraft had been identified. The incident had been documented. And in Beijing, at the Central Military Commission, senior officers would shortly be reviewing the same incident from the opposite perspective. They would be asking questions. How did American fighters respond so quickly? How did they maintain surveillance of the J-11D formation? What intelligence capabilities allowed them to coordinate intercepts so efficiently? Why had the J-11D pilot not achieved the intended objective of forcing the RC-135 to depart Chinese airspace? The answers would reveal uncomfortable truths about Chinese air defense capabilities, about American surveillance and reconnaissance superiority, about the technological and operational gap between the two air forces. At 09:20 hours, Major Liu Xing received a radio call from Lingshui Air Base command post. His fighter pilot had landed. The pilot had a brief report that included a detail that made Liu's face go pale. The American fighters had photographed his pilot's aircraft. They had recorded the tail number. They had identified the plane and the unit. The strategic objective of demonstrating serious consequences had backfired completely. Instead of intimidating the American aircraft, instead of forcing it to depart Chinese airspace, instead of demonstrating Chinese willingness to challenge American operations, the intercept had accomplished the opposite. It had demonstrated Chinese desperation. It had documented Chinese aggression. It had provided American intelligence with exact identification of which pilot and which aircraft conducted the hostile intercept. The political calculation that had seemed so clear in a classified briefing had become a diplomatic liability in the harsh reality of international incident documentation. Major Liu Xing realized that orders had come from above. Orders that had seemed clear. Orders that had seemed achievable. Orders that had not anticipated American response. By mid-afternoon, the incident report had reached Chinese Air Force Command. By evening, it had reached the Central Military Commission. By the next morning, Beijing was evaluating its response options. The pilot Wang Chen would not be celebrated. He would be quietly reassigned. The aircraft, tail numbered 7746, would be repainted and renumbered. The incident would be publicly denied or minimized. Officially, there was no hostile intercept. There was a routine patrol that had encountered an American reconnaissance aircraft operating illegally in Chinese space. The American aircraft had departed. No weapons were employed. No threat was made. The story Beijing told itself, and the world would be very different from the story the gun cameras and signals intelligence systems had documented. But in classified intelligence briefings across the United States, in Seoul, in Tokyo, in Canberra, and throughout NATO, the incident would be analyzed with meticulous precision. The photograph of the J-11D would be distributed. The tail number would be entered into intelligence databases. The pilot profile would be analyzed. The tactical sequence would be studied for indicators of threat escalation patterns. The incident would become a data point in a larger assessment of Chinese willingness to risk military confrontation with American forces. It would contribute to intelligence judgments about Beijing's strategic intentions. It would influence policy decisions about American military presence in the Indo-Pacific. It would demonstrate that Beijing's attempt at intimidation through proximity and aggressive geometry had failed. That failure would be noted by potential allies like Taiwan, like the Philippines, Vietnam. It would be noted by strategic competitors. It would be noted by military planners evaluating future scenarios. The pilot Wang Chen had thought he was executing strategic policy. He had actually provided American intelligence with the most evidence possible, evidence recorded on camera, evidence with a tail number, evidence that could be analyzed and studied and used to forecast future Chinese behavior. The message Beijing intended to send in through aggressive intercept had been superseded by the message sent through photographic documentation and an intelligence dissemination. The incident was concluded at 9:15 hours when the J-11D pilot initiated his break to the southwest. The consequences would unfold for months, years, decades. This was how modern great power competition worked, not direct military conflict, but through incidents like this one, through actions and reactions, through documentation and analysis, through the realization that in an era of constant surveillance, constant monitoring, constant intelligence gathering, attempting to intimidate through proximity was not intimidation at all. It was self-documentation of your own aggression,